Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And this is kind of this episode is like the third part of a series on nutrition. Because come to find out, after talking to a lot of people, people are so confused on what proper nutrition is or what nutrients does our body need in order to grow, heal, thrive, and survive, everything that we actually need. So, two podcasts ago, I did the whole podcast on protein, how important protein is. And then last podcast, I did it on fat and how very vital, important fat and cholesterol really are to our nutrition, and how we're being lied to saying that fat is what makes you fat and fat's causing cardiovascular disease and all this stuff that's been proven over and over again that is not true, but they keep on telling us that. And so this one is just going to be on carbohydrates. And so I know a lot of people are confused on carbohydrates, but you got to remember human beings are the only animals on the planet that have to be told what to eat. All other animals just know instinctively what to eat. Their body will crave the nutrients they need. Our body does that also, except for up until our new dietary guidelines came out in 1977. Now, all of a sudden, we have all these food manufacturers making all these ultra processed carbohydrate things. So they're telling carbohydrates are so important and fat is killing you. But it's because their profits are going through the roof on how expensive or how much money they make. So there is money laying behind why people are telling you the wrong things and why you're getting sicker and sicker. So anyway, I'm going to go right on into it. First, remember, and I've talked about this in the last two podcasts also, proper nutrition in order to give your body all the nutrients that it needs, okay, to be able to grow, health, thrive, and survive. It has to have protein. It has to have fat and cholesterol, has to have that, has to have vitamins, it has to have minerals, and it has to have water. That's it. If you can give it and give it good quality protein and good quality fat and quality vitamins and minerals, and you can get all that good quality of everything. And I'm not saying one diet over the other. I'm just saying if you wanted to eat nothing but meat with the good healthy animal protein, which is we are animals, so we use animal protein, good healthy animal fat, and that has all the vitamins, minerals that you need in it as well. So you could actually live, like I said in the last podcast, from the time you're born till you're 120 years old and eat nothing but animal meat and animal fat, and you'd be perfectly healthy and a lot more healthy than what people are doing now. So anyway, so protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, and water is what we need. So what about carbohydrates? Remember when I talked about earlier, all your macronutrients, protein, fat, and carbohydrates, when you eat those get down to your intestines and they get broken down to the basic building blocks. So with protein, they get broken down to amino acids. Fat gets broken down to fatty acids, and carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. Okay, that's the basic building blocks of all these. So right off the bat, obviously, if you're having trouble maintaining your glucose in the right levels, you need to quit eating glucose. That's kind of like a common sense. And all carbohydrates, which means all plant-based foods. I've also heard a lot of people don't even know what carbohydrates are. A carbohydrate just means it comes from a plant. So any fruits, vegetables, and all this processed food, which is totally different kind of carb. We'll talk about that. But anyway, so protein gets broken down to amino acids, fat gets broken down to fatty acids, carbohydrates get broken down to glucose. As far as the protein, the amino acids, there are 9 essential amino acids that our body does not make. We have to get them from the food we eat. With fat, there are 2 essential fatty acids, means our body doesn't make them. We have to get it from the food that we eat. Carbohydrates, there's no such thing as an essential glucose. Your body doesn't need it. Your body can make all the glucose that it needs. It can make it from protein and it can make it from fat. And that's kind of really how we've been doing it all the way since the beginning of time up until our new dietary guidelines come out. So that's going to be what I'm going to talk about. We're just talking about carbohydrates. And I'll go through the same links. We'll go all the way from digestion all the way to elimination. So first, digestion. With all our other macronutrients, when we eat those, they get down the intestines, and most of the you get a little bit of digestion when you're chewing your food. Then it goes down the stomach, gets more digestion when it comes to contact with the stomach acid, and then your stomach slowly releases that food into our intestines, where it breaks it down to those basic building blocks of amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose. However, with carbohydrates, it's a little bit different. So even though you have these enzymes that are secreted from the pancreas, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. Well, actually, I'll talk about them now. There is an enzyme that breaks down protein, and it's called protease. Pro for protein, ase because it's an enzyme. Then also to break down fat, remember the other name for fats is lipids. So the enzyme that breaks down lipids is lipase. So you have protease for proteins, lipase for fat, and amylase is what breaks down carbohydrates into glucose. Now, with the protease and the lipase, those are mainly just in the top part of the small intestine. Amylase is there also, but amylase is also in your saliva. So carbohydrates, you actually start breaking down carbohydrates in the mouth. And that's why they've had experiments like in grade school where you put a cracker on your tongue and let it sit there and dissolve, once your saliva gets used to it until it starts tasting sweet because it turns it into glucose. Although glucose isn't really that sweet. Fructose is what's sweet, and sugar is made up of half glucose, half fructose. And then high fructose corn syrup probably has more fructose. I'll tell you all about why fructose is toxic to our bodies later. And I've also talked about it in other podcasts. But anyway, so with carbohydrates, your digestion actually starts in the mouth. And why this is important is because when your digestion starts in the mouth and you get that sweet tooth in your mouth, sweet taste in your mouth, your body is already starting to get revved up for you to eat carbohydrates because it does not want a high glucose level. So just by having the carbohydrate in your mouth, your body's already starting to produce insulin because it's wanting to try to hurry up and get this glucose out of its body, out of the bloodstream as soon as it can. So what they found is this happens. It's called the cephalic phase of digestion. This happens even if you don't swallow it. So if you put something really sweet in your mouth, even like an artificial sweetener, you put an artificial sweetener in your mouth and then you spit it out and then they test your insulin levels will go up just because you put that in your mouth. And that's why when you talk about these artificial sweeteners and these, Diet Cokes and all this kind of stuff, there's never ever been a study that showed anybody who's drinking diet sodas ever lost any weight. It has nothing to do with your weight loss. And that's why, even though it says there's 0 calories in it, it's not about calories. It's about your insulin levels. And when you put something in your mouth and you're not given substance to be secreted, now you have high insulin in your blood, which is going to make your blood glucose drop. When your blood glucose drops and you're used to burning carbohydrates for your energy, like I've talked about in other podcasts, when that drops, it's going to stimulate your hunger and you're going to eat more. And so depending on what types of food you eat will determine how bad that is. But most in general, when you have diet soda, even though the soda itself wasn't causing obesity, what you eat afterwards because it stimulates your hunger, that's what causes the obesity. And we'll go more into all this later. So anyway, so the food goes down, it gets in your stomach. If you have carbohydrates there, you've already get insulin already getting ready to be, or already being released. Then it goes into your intestines. Now, once it's in your intestines, okay, remember we talked about when we talked about the protein and we talked about fat in the last 2 episodes. When those go down into the intestines and they get broken down to the amino acids and the fatty acids, they stay in the stomach for longer periods of time. That stays in the stomach because it takes a lot of acid to break those down. Then once they get into the intestines, they stay in your intestines for a long period of time also, all the way down through the small intestine into the large intestine. And if you remember back when we talked in the last 2 episodes, there are 2 hormones that get secreted called peptide YY and cholecystokinin. And all you need to remember about those is when those get stimulated by protein and fat in the intestines, that goes up to your medial hypothalamus in the brain and tells your body, I'm not hungry. Don't eat anymore. You're done. That's why when you eat a meal that has a lot of protein and a lot of fat in it, it will keep you feeling full for much, much longer period of time. Some people can go days without this. I've gone 2 days. My wife's gone 3 days with only having one meal. And if you do it with a good protein and fat source, it's very easy to do it this way. However, carbohydrates don't have that. When they get in the intestines, your body's trying to get them out as soon as possible. So against turning glucose gets absorbed over to the liver very quickly, and then the liver triages what it wants to do with this. But before that, when it's in the intestines, you also stimulate 2 other hormones that are in the intestines. One's called GLP-1 and one's called GIP. These hormones, your body naturally secretes these hormones. And what they do is they keep the food in your stomach for a longer period of time because it wants to get those carbohydrates broken down and wants it to slowly release the carbohydrates into the intestines so it can slowly get into the blood. So hopefully you won't have such a big insulin rise because your body does not want to have a high insulin rise. GLP-1 and GIP keep the food in your stomach for longer periods of time, and they stimulate your pancreas to produce more insulin because it's trying to get all the glucose that you're eating. It's trying to get rid of it because it doesn't want all that glucose. So it tries, and remember, insulin doesn't make glucose disappear. It actually pushes it into your cells. Okay. Some gets excreted through the urine, but most of it gets pushed into your cells after it gets turned into triglycerides and turned into fat. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, so that's GLP-1 and GIP. They keep food in your stomach for longer and they raise your insulin levels. Okay, that's what happens. Now, as it goes a little bit further, once the carbohydrates, their glucose is absorbed in the blood, again, our body does not want high insulin levels. Because remember, when they talk about like things like diabetes and they act like it's a high blood glucose problem, it's not. Having high blood glucose is a symptom. The underlying issue is insulin resistance. You get insulin resistance because your glucose is too high for too long. So you're constantly secreting insulin. So the cells become more resistant to the insulin. And that's a whole nother topic. But anyway, they become resistant to it. Okay. So your glucose levels are high, making your insulin levels high. The reason your glucose levels are high is because you keep eating glucose. The way you're eating glucose is in the form of either carbohydrates, which means any plant-based food. So fruits, vegetables, those are the God-made carbohydrates. Those are fine. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the man-made carbohydrates, which is what's killing all of us. So anyway, so now your body doesn't want high insulin levels either. So there's another hormone in your intestines that gets secreted called DPP4. What DPP4 does is it inactivates, it neutralizes the GLP-1 and the GIP to allow your insulin levels to start coming back down again and to start letting food come out through your stomach again. Okay. That's important when we talk about, we can talk about that now. This is natural. This is how it happens. So you eat carbohydrates, go into your stomach, go into your intestine, turn in glucose, gets in your system. Your body secretes, I'm just reiterating what I just said. Your body secretes GLP-1 and GIP that keeps the carbohydrates, food in your stomach for a little bit longer, and it also raises your insulin levels. Then when the carbohydrates are done, it secretes DPP4 that inactivates it and allows your insulin levels to come down. However, now we have drug companies who are making all these medications, and you've heard about Ozempic and semaglutide. It's not just semaglutide. There's other ones. What they found, what they want to do is they're telling you that you can eat anything you want to, just take this drug that actually activates the same receptors that your body has for the GLP-1. That's why it's called a GLP-1 agonist. So by giving medication, it actually causes your stomach to become paralyzed. So you don't, so the food doesn't come out very much. And so everybody's not eating as much. And so they're losing weight thinking, oh my gosh, this is great. And then they go and they get their A1Cs and oh, look, my glucose is coming down. I'm doing great. That's false. That's not what's happening. Yes, you may be losing weight, but you're doing it by making your insulin levels high. And there are so many adverse effects with these GLP-1 agonists. They are horrible, more adverse effects than almost any other drug. And a lot of people even now are talking about how they're causing the stomach to become continuously paralyzed. They're having all kinds of constipation issues, horrible things. But the other thing is it's raising your insulin levels. So you may watch your glucose and your A1Cs come down, but you're doing it because you're raising your insulin levels, which makes the diabetes worse, which makes you, if you're not diabetic, it could cause you to become diabetic because now you have a drug that's stimulating your insulin levels. And so again, it's not just Ozempic, semaglutide. There are other GLP-1 agonists. There's semaglutide, which you already know, that's Ozempic, Rybelsus, and Wegovy. There's dulaglutide, which is Trulicity. Exenatide, which is by Bydureon or Byetta, like liraglutide, which is Victoza or Saxenda, or lixisenatide, which is Adlixin. Those all do the same thing. The news media just picked up on semaglutide, on Ozempic and Wegovy for some reason, but these all do the same thing. Now, I'm not going to go into how that works, but you can look. My podcast number 14 was what's up with this new weight loss medication we keep hearing about. And I'll explain exactly how these work, but that's basically it. They work by overriding your body's natural mechanism, paralyzing your stomach and causing high insulin levels. Then we also have, remember I said DPP4 is what's secreted to bring those insulin levels down because your body doesn't want high insulin levels. Well, drug companies who are focusing on keeping your blood glucose down are coming up with other ways to keep your insulin levels up. And again, keeping your insulin levels up is what's causing all the problem with insulin resistance and diabetes and organ damage and everything else anyway. So now, since they know that there's a DPP4 hormone that'll bring your insulin levels down, we've come up with drugs, not we, but man has come up with drugs to block DPP4. Okay, so it's actually called a DPP4 antagonist, which means it blocks it. So when you're blocking your own body's DPP4, that's going to be allowing your insulin levels to stay high again. So again, making diabetes worse. And when I'm talking about these DPP4 antagonists, we're talking about like allogliptin, which is Nicena, linagliptin, which is Tradjenta, saxagliptin, which is Onglyza, and sitagliptin, which is Januvia. So if you're on any of those medications, and there are millions of people on these medications. So if you're not on these medications, you're wondering like, why are you giving me all this medication? Because there are a lot of people who are on these. And those all do that. They inhibit your body's ability to bring your insulin levels down. And I talked about this in episode number 72 on how do diabetic medications work, and episode number 73 on what are some of the adverse effects of diabetic medications. So if you want to know more about that, you can go to those. So anyway, so that's what happens once your carbohydrates get into your intestines. Once it's in your intestines, it gets shunted straight over the liver. And now the liver acts like a triage station. It's like, okay, I've got all this glucose that's coming to me. I need to figure out what to do with it. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to go to the glucose that gets in the blood will be used for whatever immediate energy you need right then, right after you're done eating. So if you're done eating and then you go play sports, or if you're done eating and you go for a nice brisk walk, that's good. You might be able to burn off some of that glucose, but it's not going to burn off that much depending on how strenuous your exercise is. But you're not going to burn off that much. But so that's one thing the glucose goes to. Then the rest of it, your liver looks at and say, okay, you have glycogen stores in your liver. Glycogen is how your body stores glucose. And it doesn't need to store very much glucose. Remember when we talked about fat, we have fat cells all over, right underneath our skin, all over our body, because we need lots of fat. Not that you have to be obese, but we have lots of fat cells. So you don't have to be obese and still have a lot of fat on you. And you need that for your energy if you're doing it the right way. If you're actually using the fat to be your normal energy source, and glucose is only supposed to be for your fight or flight energy. And you can tell that because you have fat stores all over your subcutaneous tissues, lots of it. It's 9 calories per gram versus carbohydrates, only 4 calories per gram. And you only have a tiny 10% of your liver is all you have stores for. If that's all you lived off was carbohydrates, was glucose, you have enough glycogen, which is that's like taking glucose, all these little glucose molecules, stack them together like a little brick of glucose, and that's called glycogen, and that's the storage form. That gets stored in about 10% of your liver. If you only lived off that glycogen stores enough energy to last your basal metabolism, meaning you're just sleeping, you're not doing anything else, for about 24 hours, and that's it. Okay. So that proves that you're not supposed to be using carbohydrates for your energy source. And then every single one of your skeletal muscles has 1% of glycogen in each of those also, but they're only used for that skeletal muscle, which also lets you know glycogen and glucose is supposed to be for our fight or flight energy, and that's all. But that's not what we're doing anymore, because the food companies and drug companies are convincing us that we need to eat carbs all the time, not eat protein, not eat fat, eat all these carbohydrates. We're keeping our glucose levels high. We're keeping our insulin levels high. And if you listen to my past podcast, when your insulin levels are high, you force your body to store fat. It cannot burn its own fat for its energy source. When your insulin levels are low, that's when you burn the fat out of your subcutaneous fat tissues for your energy source. And so you're constantly burning. What you're supposed to do is store the fat, then burn it, then store it, then burn it. That's how you're supposed to do it. But when you eat carbohydrates all the time, you're putting tons of glucose in your body, having very high insulin levels. All you can do is turn that glucose into fat and store that. And so every time you eat carbohydrates, you're storing more and more fat, and you're keeping your insulin levels high so you can never burn your own. So the cause of our obesity is all of our carbohydrate intake, especially by all these man-made foods where people are snacking on these all day long. So anyway, I'm sorry, I keep getting sidetracked. So anyway, that's what it does. So the liver is triaging out the glucose. First, it has glucose, keeps glucose in the blood for whatever activity is happening immediately after a meal. Then it replenishes your little bitty 10% glycogen stores down in your liver, and then the glycogen in your muscles, and all the rest of the glucose, which is a lot. All of a sudden, that is going to be turned into triglycerides in the liver, and then it's going to be transported to be stored in your fat cells. That's what happens when you eat carbohydrates. So if you go and you get your lipid level checked and you have very high triglycerides, stop eating carbohydrates. That's what's causing your triglyceride level to go up. And if you didn't know what a triglyceride is, and I talked about this when I talked about fat, is picture big capital E, and you've got one vertical bar called the glycerol. That's a glycerol backbone. And the three horizontal parts of the E, that is your free fatty acids. So when you put three fatty acids, that's tri, and then you have a glycerol backbone, that's glycerol. So that's why it's called a triglyceride. And a triglyceride is the form of your fat takes when it's being mobilized around your body in a protein, because fat doesn't go into your body. They're trying to tell you fat's floating around your bloodstream, clogging up arteries, and that's a lie. That's not what's happening. Your body naturally does this. It wraps a protein around it because you can't put fat into the blood. God knows this. God's not stupid. So he wraps a protein around it so the fat and the water don't come in contact either. And that protein is like a little ship that carries cholesterol and triglycerides. And this little protein, which is your VLDL, your very low density lipoprotein, your IDL is intermediate density lipoprotein, and your LDLs is low density lipoprotein. These are your ships. It's a lipoprotein because there's a protein and a lipid all together in this little ship. And I talked all about that in the past podcast, so I don't want to waste a lot of time now. So anyway, so that's what it's doing. It turns all your excess glucose into triglycerides, puts them into these little ships, these little LDL ships, and it goes around to your body and it stores it in your fat cells. So that's where all your obesity is coming from. And also remember, when we talk about protein and all the amino acids that are, especially animal protein that has all the good quality amino acids that we need, protein does multiple things all through the body. Our whole body is basically made up of protein, with our enzymes, our hormones, our structure, our muscles, our organs, our bones. Everything is made up of protein. So important. Fat is used for so many things. It is not just used for energy like they're trying to tell you. You use fat for everything. And you can go back and listen to my last podcast. It talks about all the multiple things it does as far as insulation, insulin regulation, cushioning your bones. There's just so many different things. There's so many different things. You can go back and listen to that. And the other thing that I wanted you to realize is they also talk about this is what's causing cardiovascular disease, is having high LDLs. Okay. That is not true. LDLs, there are good LDLs and there are bad LDLs. And that's what you have to look for. Is this a good LDL or a bad LDL? The way you can tell, the way you get the bad LDLs, they're called small, dense LDLs. Those are the bad ones. The good ones are large, buoyant LDLs. We don't separate those in America. We don't go and have those separated out. So you never know. They just lump them all together. What causes the bad, small, dense LDLs is constantly eating carbohydrates. So you have massive amounts of triglycerides being formed in the liver from trying to convert these carbohydrates into a storage form of energy. And all these triglycerides are getting crammed into those little ships, those protein ships that I was talking about that carries both triglycerides and cholesterol. When you cram so much triglycerides in there, that as it goes through, as this ship is going around depositing all this fat into all the different areas that it needs to be going to, the ship shrinks down to very, very tiny. And it gets so tiny, and that's why it's called a small, dense LDL. It gets so tiny, the liver doesn't even want to take it back up. So it stays in circulation for a long time, which allows glucose to attack it and it causes glycation, and also the inflammation that we all have in our bodies because of all the vegetable and seed oils that we're eating all the time and all the chemicals in all our food. And it's horrible. But those things are what makes a small, dense LDL bury into your arteries. Your arteries then sets up an inflammatory response trying to get rid of these small, dense LDLs. And that's where the blood vessels get deteriorated. And that's what's causing the cardiovascular disease. They say it's LDLs, high LDLs, that's causing this, but that's not true. High LDL, the reason that is there because fat is used for every single cell in your body is made up of a fatty membrane. So anytime you have cell regeneration, you have to have fat there to be able to regenerate those cells. Well, anytime you have damage to your blood vessel, you're going to have new cells being regenerated. So your LDL level is going to go up so it can take care of all that, all the new generation of cells and all the other damage that's going on. So what I'm saying is blaming fat for cardiovascular disease is like blaming an ambulance for all the major car wrecks on the highway. Because every single time you see a major car wreck on the highway, there's going to be an ambulance there. That doesn't mean the ambulance caused the wreck. It just means they're there to help. Same thing with high LDLs with the cardiovascular disease. The LDLs are there to help as long as it's the large buoyant LDLs and not the small dense ones. The way you can tell if it is the small dense ones is when you get your lipid profile, take your triglycerides and divide that by your good cholesterol, your HDLs. Those should be about the same level in your blood. They should be equal. So if you divide triglycerides divided by HDLs, that needs to be less than 2 or really closer to 1. But if your triglycerides are way more than 2 times your HDLs, this is indicative that you have these small, dense LDLs and you have got to quit eating your carbohydrates because it's going to get worse. So what actually does cause cardiovascular disease? High insulin levels, high glucose level. There's these 4 things: having high insulin levels all the time, which is caused by eating carbohydrates and having high glucose all the time. Then high glucose itself, because when you have a high glucose, that's when you start glycating these small, dense LDLs. The inflammation that you have from eating fructose all the time, sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and also by eating man-made food with all the vegetable and seed oils, because vegetable and seed oils are extremely inflammatory to your body, as well as all the other chemicals that we're exposed to. But what we put in our mouth, we have 100% control over. And then it's these small, dense LDLs. So high insulin, high glucose, inflammation, and small, dense LDLs cause deterioration to your blood vessels, and that's what causes cardiovascular disease. And what happens is this happens over time, over a long period of time. It usually takes about 20 to 30 years of poor eating because you have that many fat cells in your body that you can slowly be adding fat to until all of a sudden you come into a max. You put as much fat in your body as you need to. Now your body doesn't know what to do with this other glucose because it can't put in the fat cells because your fat cells are all stuffed. So that's when your glucose levels go high, insulin levels go high, pancreas quits putting out as much insulin, and you end up with full-blown diabetes. But since it takes 20 to 30 years, most people don't even think about it. Because if you ate carbohydrates right now and you fell over dead, you would know, oh, shoot, I better not be eating carbohydrates. But if it takes 20 to 30 years for this to happen, nobody thinks about it. So that's carbohydrates. That's what happens with them. So real quick, what are the good carbs versus what are the bad carbs? Good carbs, that is God-made carbohydrates. Remember, carbohydrate just means all plant-based food. So that means fruits and vegetables. Those are God-made. They're already packaged. They have fiber in them. The fruits do have some fructose in it, but it's very little amount. When you eat the whole fruit, that automatically regulates your hunger. So you can't just sit there and eat a bunch. You can't sit down and eat 10 oranges, okay? Your body just won't let you do that because of all the fiber and everything that's in that also, and the phytonutrients. So that's the good ones. The only thing you have to worry about is fruits and vegetables. One, they do have phytonutrients. They do have tiny amounts of vitamins and tiny amounts of minerals, but you have to eat so many plants to be able to get the vitamins and minerals that you need. It's going to be very, very hard to where if you eat animal meat, like a good steak, good fatty steak, that has all of it. It's called nutrient dense. you have all the nutrients, all the vitamins, all the minerals, all the protein, all the fat that you need in that one little thing. So when you eat it and it keeps you feeling full, you give all your nutrients, your body the nutrients it needs. And so your body doesn't make you hungry anymore because it's already getting the nutrients it needs. If you're just doing this with plants, you're going to have to eat a ton of plants. And remember, all plants, even fruits and vegetables, their basic building block is glucose. So in order to eat all the plants that you need to eat, you're going to be increasing your glucose also, and you're still only going to get a few of the vitamins and minerals you need, and you're not going to get all the amino acids that you need, because plant protein and animal protein, they have a lot of the same protein, but there's about, I think, three different amino acids that animal protein has that plant protein doesn't even have. So anyway, that's fruits, that's vegetables. Eat them, but eat them very sparingly, because there are phytonutrients. There are the vitamins and minerals that are in it, but there's also phytotoxins. Plants don't want you to eat them. So they have toxins that will make animals sick when they eat them. These are like lectins, if you've ever heard of lectins. Oxalate crystals and phytic acid are three of the toxins that are in plants. So if you eat a lot of plants and you don't cook them right, you're going to be getting these toxins in you too. And there's a lot of people that have oxalate crystals floating around in the blood. So if you have pain in your joints, pain in your knees, your ankles, anything like that, that may be from these oxalate crystals secreting out. So it's like little grains of sand that are getting into your joints and causing all this pain. So that's something you have to be worried about. And also renal stones. Most renal stones are made out of calcium oxalate crystals. That's where the oxalate comes from the toxins that are in these plants. So that's another thing just to be careful of. And then there's the seeds. And seeds, remember, there's grains, nuts, and legumes. These are all seeds. Grains are a seed from grasses, okay? That, like your wheat grass, stuff like that. Nuts are grown on trees, and nuts, there's one nut and one shell, one seed. And that's what makes a nut, like a walnut. And then legumes, it's one shell called a pod, but there's multiple seeds inside. Like if you picture peas is one, peas, green beans, where there's multiple seeds inside a pod. That's what legumes are. So grains, nuts, and legumes. You don't need any of these, and you definitely can eat too many of these. And a lot of people have adverse effects to these. So just be aware, that's a difference. Eat them. You may be allergic, so be aware of that. A lot of people have intestinal issues when they eat these, because you're not supposed to eat them. You definitely don't eat them as much as you can. Remember nuts? We used to eat nuts around Christmas, and we would have to take the shell off of each individual walnut or pecan or whatever and eat it. So we didn't eat very many. But now you get bags where they're already shelled, and you can eat 2, 3, 4 handfuls a day. You should never eat that much, because there are toxins in it and there are other adverse effects. So just be aware. Just because you can eat something constantly doesn't mean you should be doing it. Now, those are the good carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables. Just eat them kind of like a condiment. Mainly have your meat and your fat as your meal. You can have a little bit of vegetables. Just stay away from the starchy vegetables like the potatoes that have a lot of starch, which is just glucose. It's just a lot more glucose packed into a smaller area. But just eat a small amount if you want to eat them at all. The horrible carbohydrates are ultra processed, man-made food carbohydrates. This is the one where they take those grains, those seeds, and they grind them down to where they get rid of all the phytonutrients, some of the phytotoxins, they get rid of some of that too, but they break it down to just a powder. And that powder is glucose, because all carbohydrates are made out of glucose. And that's why it's called ultra processed. They go to great lengths to get everything out of these grains, of these seeds, except for the powdered glucose that's going to be going in all their foods. And so that's what man-made food is made out of. It's made out of ultra-processed carbohydrates, like we just said, made out of sugar and high fructose corn syrup, because it's cheap and it's extremely addictive. They know they can get people addicted, and they do this on purpose. And then the vegetable and seed oils that are absolutely horrible for your bodies. And so that's what they do. They get rid of the fiber, they crush all the flour down to glucose, and then they get rid of all the vitamins, all the minerals, and then they go and they try to make you addicted to this. And they do this on purpose. And I talked about this. I actually did a 2-part series, 66 and 67 are 2 episodes, called Your Carbohydrate Addiction is by Design. They knew they were getting you addicted, and they were trying to. And then there's another podcast, number 36, saying, Is sugar addiction a real thing? Yes, it is a real thing and it is on purpose. And that's why they actually have people come in when they're making their food and they test how much sugar can we put in it to where you love it. It's called the bliss point. And it couldn't be anything further from the bliss point. But that's the bliss point means that just enough sugar. If you go a little bit more, it's going to be too sweet. So they knock it back down, but they put sugar in everything. And it is for the addiction property of this. And remember, glucose, if you have sugar or high fructose corn syrup, that's half glucose and half fructose for sugar, which is called sucrose. Or for a high fructose corn syrup, you have different percentages, but it's still glucose, still fructose. And fructose is extremely toxic to your body. It causes it automatically, when fructose to your liver to get metabolized, because no other cell in your body can metabolize fructose. Every cell can metabolize glucose, but not fructose. So fructose goes to the liver. It gets turned into inflammatory mediators. So it causes inflammation in your body. Gets turned into uric acid, which does a lot of things to your body, including causing hypertension and also causing gout. And it also the majority of fructose that you take in automatically it's turned into triglycerides immediately. So anytime you eat sugar, high fructose corn syrup, you are making fat to be able to be stored into your body. And again, those things are what raises your insulin levels, which actually makes you store your fat in your body. And I talked all about fructose in episode number 6 called What is Fructose and Why is it Poison? So you can go back there if you want to hear that. And then the last one, we have ultra processed carbs, sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and vegetable and seed oils. And I got to tell you, the vegetable and seed oils are absolutely horrible, horrible for your body. I'm not going to go into it right now. You can listen to podcast number 21 called Are Vegetable and Seed Oils Bad for You? The answer is they are not just bad, they are horrible. They are toxic. Our body doesn't know what to do with them. They're extremely inflammatory for many different reasons. All the chemicals, the petrochemical solvents they put in that, the deodorizers, the bleaching agents, artificial flavoring, artificial coloring, artificial sweeteners, all the chemicals they put in these things, those are foreign to our body. So our body thinks they shouldn't be there. So our body is in constant inflammation because of these things. Okay. That's really all I'm going to tell. I know I'm going long, but I just want you to understand you do not need carbohydrates at all. Carbohydrates, they all get turned into glucose. So if you have trouble with your glucose, stay away from carbohydrates. All this gets turned into triglycerides. The more carbohydrates you have, the more triglycerides you have, and the more chance you have of getting these small, dense LDLs. And that's where all your inflammation and your cardiovascular disease and all your other organ damage comes from. So if you do want to eat fruits and vegetables, God made fruits and vegetables, nothing else with it. Just eat a small amount, about like a condiment that you would have with your meal. You don't need to have very much. You don't need to eat them at all if you don't want to. But by far, stay away from man-made, ultra-processed foods. Everything in a box, bottle, bag, can, the things that are in your vending machines, on your conference room tables, everything, all the stuff that people bring in with donuts, cakes, cookies, chips. You know what I'm talking about. Fast food restaurants, all these are just nothing but carbohydrates, sugar, and these vegetable and seed oils. So stay away from that and you will be able to be healthy. You can actually, if you go carnivore, if you actually go to keto or carnivore where you stay away from all these carbohydrates, if you're on diabetic medication, you can get off your diabetic medication. You can actually get rid of your type 2 diabetes. The only way you're going to do that is quit putting glucose in your mouth, which means quit eating carbohydrates. Okay, that's all. I know I'm a broken record, so I'll quit right now. I really hope you guys understand what we're talking about. So proper nutrition, you need good, healthy animal protein, good, healthy animal fat, which could be any kind of meat or eggs or milk, Greek yogurt, that kind of stuff are good, healthy proteins. And so stick with that and stay away from all the carbohydrates. If you want to have a fruit and vegetable every now and then, that's fine. But you need water, vitamins, minerals, good protein, and good fat, and leave the carbs out of it if you want to. So that's all I have for now. I hope this made sense to you. And if you have any other questions, please get a hold of me. Send me an email, talk to me on Facebook, however. And once again, I want you to thank you very much for listening. Have a great week. And remember, always Make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.